Welcome to the deep dive. This time we're going to be talking about Fred and Rose West.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, one of the most chilling cases, I think, in British history.
Right.
So we have a YouTube video here going over all the details of the case. And our goal today is to really try to understand how two seemingly ordinary people could be capable of such monstrous acts.
Absolutely. It's a question that continues to fascinate and disturb me.
Right.
They really were masters of deception, hiding this horrifying reality behind just a normal facade.
Totally. And that's what makes this case so fascinating, right?
Yeah.
You hear about these crimes and you think, could this happen anywhere?
Yeah.
Could this happen near me?
Right.
So let's start with their early lives.
Okay.
Both Fred and Rose had incredibly traumatic childhoods.
Yeah.
Fred was subjected to sexual abuse by his own mother.
Wow.
And Rose was repeatedly raped by her father.
Oh, my goodness.
How much did those early experiences shape their later actions?
I mean, it's impossible to say for certain.
Right.
But I think what we can look at is how this shared history of abuse might have created like a really distorted sense of what normal is.
Okay.
It's almost like they found solace
Yeah.
in each other's darkness.
So like a shared trauma bond almost.
Exactly. Yeah, and this kind of brings us to like a key psychological concept we see in this case.
Okay.
Folie à deux.
Folie à deux.
Madness of two, a shared delusion
Okay.
that could have cemented their bond in this like shared world of depravity.
So they weren't just a couple. They were partners in crime almost.
Yes.
Feeding off of each other's darkness and reinforcing these disturbing beliefs.
Absolutely.
It's a chilling thought.
It's scary, and it gets even more disturbing when you think about how this folie à deux could have escalated their crimes.
Right.
So you have two people locked in this delusional world where their actions are justified, even necessary in their minds.
Right. It's like they created their own twisted reality where like the rules of morality don't apply.
Totally. And that brings us to 25 Cromwell Street.
Okay.
The house that would become just synonymous with their crimes.
The House of Horrors.
Yes.
Yeah.
From the outside, it looked like any other home in Gloucester.
Yeah. I remember seeing the pictures on the news.
Yeah.
And it's just this ordinary looking house that held so much darkness.
Right.
It really hits home that evil can lurk anywhere behind any facade.
Absolutely.
So what was their modus operandi? How did they lure their victims into this trap?
They targeted vulnerable young women.
Okay.
Often runaways, those who were estranged from their families.
Okay.
They offered them shelter, food, a sense of belonging,
Right.
a false sense of security.
And the fact that they were like this seemingly normal couple, at least on the surface, probably made them seem less threatening.
Yeah. It's easier to trust a couple than a lone stranger.
Right.
Especially when you're young and desperate and alone. And they exploited that trust in just the most horrific way.
It really makes you wonder how many warning signs were missed.
Right.
How many people maybe suspected something but just didn't want to get involved.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we all have a responsibility to look out for each other.
Absolutely.
Especially those who are most vulnerable.
I agree 100%.
So there's a detail from the source material that I found particularly disturbing.
Yeah.
The family joke about their daughter Heather,
Right.
who disappeared.
Yeah.
They would joke, you better watch out because if you don't shut up and stop causing your dad or your mom any trouble, you'll end up like Heather, 2 down and 3 across in the patio.
That's so chilling. To joke about a missing child being buried under the patio. It's just, it really speaks volumes about the normalization of violence within their household.
It adds another layer to that whole folie à deux thing, right?
Right.
Like they were operating in their own twisted reality.
Yeah.
They weren't just concealing their crimes. They were incorporating them into their family dynamic.
Absolutely.
Or a level of depravity that's just hard to comprehend.
It's really scary.
What was it like for the other children living in that house?
Right.
Were they also victims?
Yeah.
Even if they weren't physically harmed?
Yeah. It's hard to imagine a more traumatic upbringing. The constant fear, the sense of being complicit in something terrible.
Yeah.
Even if only through silence.
Yeah.
They must have left deep scars.
And we know that one of the children eventually came forward with allegations of abuse.
Right.
Which is actually what triggered the police investigation.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if, in their own way, they were trying to break free from that environment, reclaim their own lives.
And that act of courage ultimately led to the unraveling of the West's horrific crimes.
Absolutely.
But the investigation was just beginning.
Right.
What the police uncovered at 25 Cromwell Street would shock the nation.
It was just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
Revealing this, like, huge scale of depravity that no one could have imagined. Excavating 25 Cromwell Street was like peeling back layers of a nightmare.
Yeah.
Every discovery was more horrifying than the last.
Right.
And it wasn't just the number of bodies, but the way they were found.
Yeah.
The evidence of torture.
Oh, wow.
The lengths they went to conceal their crimes.
It's hard to imagine the toll it took on the investigators.
Right.
To be confronted with that level of depravity day after day.
Yeah.
It must have been utterly draining.
There were seasoned detectives who were visibly shaken, struggling to reconcile what they were seeing with their own understanding of humanity.
And let's not forget about the forensic experts, the anthropologists, the pathologists who had to like piece together the remains, try to identify the victims, determine cause of death.
It must have been grueling.
Absolutely.
Imagine trying to identify individuals from just skeletal remains, many of which had been buried for years, some even dismembered.
One of the most disturbing details I remember reading about was that many of the victims were missing fingers and toes.
Right.
What was the purpose of that?
It was to hinder identification.
Okay.
Fingerprints and footprints are unique identifiers.
Right.
So by removing them, it made it much harder for the police to connect the remains to missing persons reports.
God, it's so chilling how calculated they were.
It really is.
It wasn't just like blind rage or anything like that. It was cold and sinister.
A sinister intelligence at work.
Yeah.
As the investigation progressed, the net began to close in.
Yeah.
But then on New Year's Day, 1995, Fred West took his own life.
Oh, wow.
In his prison cell, leaving the case in a state of uncertainty.
What a devastating blow to the families of the victims.
Right.
To be denied the chance to see him face justice.
Totally.
To have him answer for his crimes.
Right.
Must have felt like a final act of cruelty.
Absolutely. And from a legal standpoint, Fred's suicide created a huge challenge. They had to build a case against Rose without the testimony of her husband.
It must have felt like such an uphill battle.
Right.
But they persevered.
They did. They were determined to hold Rose accountable.
A crucial turning point came with the forensic analysis of Charmaine West's remains.
Yes.
Fred's stepdaughter from his first marriage.
Right.
Her body was found at 25 Midland Road, their previous home.
Correct.
And her death had always been attributed to Fred.
Yes.
But now with Fred gone, the spotlight shifts to Rose.
Right.
Was there any evidence to suggest that she was involved in Charmaine's death?
This is where forensic odontology comes into play.
Forensic odontology.
Yes. Professor David Whitaker, a leading expert in the field, was brought in to analyze Charmaine's dental records.
Can you back up a bit for me? What exactly is forensic odontology?
Sure. It's essentially the application of dentistry to legal matters.
Okay.
So in this case, Professor Whitaker compared Charmaine's dental records with photographs that were taken before her death. And he was able to establish that certain dental work had been done during a period when Fred was in prison.
So Rose had to have been involved.
Exactly.
That's huge.
It directly links her to at least one of the Roters.
So Professor Whitaker's analysis was a key piece of evidence.
Yes.
That helped convince the jury of Rose's guilt in Charmaine's murder.
Absolutely.
And her trial began on October 3rd, 1995.
Yes, a media sensation.
I can only imagine.
Right.
So what was the atmosphere like in the courtroom?
Tense, electrifying.
Yeah.
Rose maintained her innocence throughout the trial, claiming she was a victim of Fred's abuse and manipulation.
Right.
But the weight of the evidence against her, the forensic evidence, the witness testimonies, it was all very damning.
It must have been incredibly difficult for the jury.
Yeah.
To sit through weeks of graphic testimony.
Oh, right.
To be confronted with just the sheer horror of what had happened.
And then to have to make a decision that would have such profound consequences.
Exactly. And after days of deliberation, they reached a verdict.
On November 22, 1995.
Okay.
Rose West was found guilty of 10 counts of murder.
Wow.
She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
So justice was served.
At least in the eyes of the law.
But can there ever truly be closure in a case like this?
That's the question that continues to haunt the families of the victims, the community of Gloucester.
Yeah.
And really anyone who has followed this case.
Even after the trial, the story doesn't end there.
Right.
There was still the lingering question of whether there might be more victims.
Yeah, Fred hinted at more killings, in his confessions. And given their modus operandi, their predatory nature, the fact that they often targeted young women who might not be immediately missed, it's certainly a possibility.
Investigators must have faced such a dilemma.
Right.
I mean, you can't just dig up an entire county based on suspicion.
Right. Where do you draw the line?
Yeah.
How much disruption is justified? Yeah.
It's a tough question.
This case really shook the UK to its core.
It did.
And it wasn't just the scale of the crimes, the sheer number of victims. It was the realization that this kind of evil could lurk beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary lives.
It shattered the illusion of safety.
Right.
The belief that these things only happen elsewhere.
Yeah.
It forced society to confront some uncomfortable questions.
Right.
About how these predators operate, how they go undetected for so long.
Absolutely.
And what can we do to protect the vulnerable?
There's been a lot of debate over the years about Rose West's involvement.
Right.
Was she a willing participant?
Yeah.
A mastermind?
Right.
Or was she a victim of Fred's manipulation?
It's so hard to tell.
Right.
Was she a manipulator?
Yeah.
A driving force behind these crimes?
Right.
Or trapped in a web of coercion and abuse?
Yeah.
It's probably a combination of factors.
Right.
Her upbringing, her relationship with Fred.
Yeah.
Her own psychological makeup. It's almost impossible to separate the two.
Right.
To disentangle their roles.
Right.
But one thing's for sure.
Yeah.
She played a significant role.
Right.
And the jury ultimately held her accountable.
Her conviction was a victory for justice.
Yeah.
A validation of the suffering of the victims and their families.
Right.
But it doesn't erase the pain, the loss, the unanswered questions that continue to haunt this case.
It doesn't offer a simple explanation for how two individuals could inflict so much suffering.
Right.
The demolition of 25 Cromwell Street.
Right.
That infamous House of Horrors.
Right.
It was more than just like bricks and mortar coming down right.
Right.
It felt like a symbolic attempt to like cleanse this place.
Yeah.
That had been stained with so much evil.
Right.
But can you really erase the past so easily?
That's a good question, and it's one that's been on the minds of a lot of people.
Yeah.
The physical structure might be gone,
right,
replaced by a quiet walkway. But those psychological scars, the echoes of those horrific crimes, they run much deeper.
It's interesting because for a while after the demolition, that site became almost like a pilgrimage site.
Right.
Where people would go to like lay flowers and try to make sense of the senseless.
It speaks to our curiosity, doesn't it? This morbid fascination with the darker aspects of human nature.
Right.
We're drawn to these stories, these glimpses into the abyss.
Right.
Maybe it's a way of confronting our own fears, our own vulnerabilities.
But for the families of the victims, it's got to be just this constant painful reminder of their loss.
Yeah.
A wound that can never fully heal.
Right.
Even with Rose West behind bars. The story doesn't really end there.
No.
The speculation about more victims never really went away.
It's hard to ignore that possibility.
Right.
Fred hinted at more killings in his confessions. And given their modus operandi, their predatory nature, the fact that they targeted young women who might not be immediately missed, it's plausible.
Investigators must have faced a real dilemma.
A huge one.
You can't just, like, dig up an entire county based on suspicion.
Right. Where do you draw the line? How much disruption is justified in the pursuit of closure?
Yeah, it's a tough question.
It is.
This case shook the UK to its core.
Absolutely.
It wasn't just the scale of the crimes, the number of victims.
Right.
It was the realization that this kind of evil could hide in plain sight.
It shattered the illusion of safety.
Right.
The belief that these things only happen elsewhere.
Right. It forced society to confront some uncomfortable questions.
Definitely.
About how these predators operate, how they go undetected for so long, and what can we do to protect the vulnerable.
Huge questions for society to grapple with.
There's been so much debate over the years about Rose West's involvement.
Oh, yeah.
Was she a willing participant in these horrific acts, a mastermind in her own right?
Yeah.
Or was she a victim of Fred's manipulation?
So hard to say.
It's a complex question.
Absolutely.
Was she a manipulator?
Right.
A driving force?
Yeah.
Or trapped in this web of coercion and abuse?
Yeah, it's probably a mix of a lot of things.
Right.
Her traumatic upbringing.
Yeah.
Her relationship with Fred.
Right.
Her own psychology.
It's almost impossible to separate the two.
Yeah.
To really disentangle their roles in this partnership.
Absolutely.
But one thing is for sure.
Yeah.
She played a significant role.
Right.
And the jury ultimately held her accountable.
They did. Her conviction was a victory for justice.
Yeah.
A validation for the families.
For sure.
But it doesn't erase the pain, the loss,
no,
the unanswered questions.
And it really doesn't offer any easy answers
No.
for how two people could inflict so much suffering on others.
It's one of the big mysteries of the human experience.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah.
What can we learn from this dark chapter in history?
That's the question, isn't it?
The legacy of Fred and Rose West.
Right.
It's this chilling reminder of the depths of human depravity.
Absolutely.
But it also compels us to do better.
Right.
To be more vigilant, to support victims of abuse, to strive to create a society where these horrors are less likely to happen.
I think you've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
This case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves.
Yeah.
About the potential for evil within us and the societal factors that contribute to these tragedies.
It's a call to action.
It is.
To be more aware, more compassionate, more dedicated to creating a safer world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
It's been a heavy deep dive.
It really has.
We've delved into some dark corners of human nature.
Yeah.
But it's a journey I think that's important to take.
I think so too.
We can't just turn away from the darkness, pretend it doesn't exist.
We have to understand it.
We have to face it head on if we want to prevent these horrors from happening again.
Absolutely. Understanding the motivations, the psychology, the context of these cases, however disturbing they might be, is essential if we want to learn from the past and create a better future.
So to our listeners, I'll leave you with this final thought.
Okay.
The story of Fred and Rose West, it's this horrifying reminder of the evil that humans are capable of.
For sure.
But it also highlights the resilience of the human spirit, the courage of those who speak out against abuse.
Absolutely.
And the importance of seeking justice for those who've been silenced.
Couldn't agree more.
Let's honor their memories by working together to create a world where these tragedies are less likely to occur.
A world where everyone feels safe and supported.
Thank you for joining us on this incredibly difficult but crucial deep dive.
It was my pleasure.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed,
and stay safe.
But most importantly, stay safe.